Finally, McCaffrey's back. Obviously, it's been rumored for a while, but we have the official word here from Shanahan that McCaffrey will be playing this week. We'll talk about everything that has broken today, and we will update the rankings on the site to show you what we're looking at. Gus Edwards listed questionable for week 10. Obviously, there's no interest in Gus Edwards whatsoever, right? Like, there's no way in hell you're playing Edwards. The only real impact that this could have is where you are looking at J.K. Dobbins. Do I think that Edwards takes over this? Of course not. Dobbins is the guy here. But I did move Dobbins recently behind like James Conner, DeAndre Swift in our rest of season rankings with the news that Edwards may be coming back to take 30% of the backfield, 20, 25% of the backfield. Where obviously Dobbins' role since Edwards was out has been phenomenal. Going over Jordan Mason, Juwan Jennings not listed on the injury report for week 10. Don't really give a damn about that, to be honest, with Jordan Mason because McCaffrey will officially be playing in week 10. Now, McCaffrey in our rest of season rankings, now that we know he is officially good to go this week, honestly, I'm sorry if it's too early. I don't freaking care. I will be moving CMC up even further. I mean, a lot of people got upset with us ranking him as an RB1 in our rest of season rankings starting 2 weeks ago, but the writing was on the wall that he was going to be back. Obviously, we're not putting him at running back 1 overall immediately. That's where he was drafted coming into the season. He was by far and away the best asset in fantasy football last year. And yes, I apologize if I quote unquote love CMC. The man won me like $150,000 in Underdog drafts 2 years back. So I do like CMC. I mean, nobody comes close when he is fully healthy in fantasy football. Again, I'm not going to rank him at running back 1 immediately in the rest of season rankings because inherently there's still some risk. And in my rankings this week, we actually have him as a high-end RB2 for week 10 because I wouldn't be surprised at all if they slowly progress McCaffrey into this offense. I'm not expecting him to immediately see 90+% of the snaps, of course. Now, going over, let's see, Tyreek Hill doesn't practice with the wrist. So, typically when you see a player not practice on a Friday, this means you are in a really tough spot to see them play on Sunday. Now, the thing with Tyreek Hill and the Miami Dolphins is this is the Monday night game. So with this being the Monday night game, this Friday practice is a lot more like a Thursday practice. I think Tyreek Hill is the type of veteran where he could very easily miss a practice later in the week, and I still think he has a realistic shot to play. So definitely a concern. It will definitely be something that you need to continue to monitor. But it's not like Tyreek misses practice on Friday, so you're for sure assuming that he doesn't play. Now, Dak Prescott going on the IR will miss at least 4 games, but his timeline is expected to be closer to 6 weeks. And let's just think about where we are at this point of the fantasy football season. If Dak misses 6 weeks, that means he misses weeks 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and yeah, that's 15, right? So he's coming back week 16, week 17. You get Dak Prescott for the final 2 weeks of the fantasy football playoffs. We already significantly knocked CeeDee Lamb this past week down to wide receiver 11 in our rankings. I'd rather have Drake London over CeeDee Lamb at this point. I'm going to move Lamb even further down. We'll have Lamb at wide receiver 12 rest of season with the expectation that this is just going to be an absolute garbage offense. Now going over to our next update, neither Tony Pollard nor Tajee Spears are listed on the injury report for week 10. We may have to move Spears up just a bit in our rest of season ranks. Is there any world in which you're playing Tajee Spears? No, you are not. But honestly, if you were to get an injury to Tony Pollard, Spears does have the receiving skill set where he potentially could be viable here. Now, let's move this over to our next option. Lamb, not listed on injury report for week 10. Lamb will be good to go. I'm expecting him to be a lot closer to a wide receiver 2 without Dak Prescott than a wide receiver 1, of course. Brian Robinson Jr. listed out for week 10, so this is something that we for sure need to update. And honestly, at this point, I would probably rather just take Pollard and Ramondre. I'd rather have Tyrone Tracy than Brian Robinson Jr. rest of season. I mean, if you're looking at Robinson, you're guaranteed to miss this week. This is a hamstring injury that has lingered for a damn long time now. Plus, you have the week 14 bye. So you are going to miss a decent chunk of the season. And here, let me go ahead and update our week 10 rankings. Previous to this, I was assuming that Brian Robinson would be good to go. And obviously, that assumption was wrong. So let's get this man all the way to the bottom of this list. And we need to put Austin Eckler in a range where you actually can consider playing him. I would for sure play Eckler over Mason, Brooks, Etienne, Bucky, Mostert, Javonte, White, Dowdle, Hubbard, Ramondre, Najee, Pollard. This is about the range where it's maybe a little bit tougher to make that argument. Hubbard could also move up himself because it's not a guarantee that Jonathan Brooks is going to be playing as we maybe thought previously. Now, Nico Collins listed as questionable for week 10. So what is so frustrating here with Nico, obviously they take him off the IR. Obviously, Nico Collins is at practice today, just in case you didn't see. He didn't practice yesterday, of course. Is this Texans-Lions game is on Sunday night. So if you're having to make the decision on whether or not you start Nico Collins and we don't get any additional information, you are going to be put in a really tough spot. Obviously, we need to move Nico back up in our ranks. I mean, I don't know. Like, this is always the difficult spot when I'm making rankings on the site, right? Do I rank him as if I say, oh, okay, if he were to play, this is where I put him? Or more so, do I rank him and say, oh, okay, well, this is about where I would be looking to start him this week. And like, say I had Terry McLaurin in an early game versus versus Nico Collins late, I'd probably just start Terry until we get additional news. So I'm going to go ahead. I'll probably put Nico at about 16 here. It just sucks. I have no idea what is going to happen with Nico Collins. Obviously, if you were to play 100% and you want him in your starting lineup, can y'all please spam the chat? Do you think Nico Collins plays this week? Simple yes or no question. Do you think Nico Collins plays? And hopefully we get an additional update tomorrow, of course. Gabe in the base says, what about Dell? I mean, obviously, if Nico does play, you move down Tank Dell. Right now, we have Tank Dell as a must-start option at wide receiver 18. But if Nico were to play, that probably would change. We got no, 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 yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no, no, yes, no, yes, yes, no, 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 yes. It does look to be a tough spot. And Daniel says we have a clown take with Lamb being a wide receiver too. You know what? Let's do something here for you, buddy. What is the Lamb underdog projection? Ooh, Lamb typically, who you had seen projected out higher or lower, about 90.5 receiving yards on underdog in a usual week with Dak Prescott, is now down to higher or lower 60.5 receiving yards, where you typically see wide receiver twos. So here you go, buddy. You're more than welcome. If you still think CeeDee Lamb is an elite wide receiver 1 with no Dak Prescott, go take him to have at least 60 receiving yards. Hell, go say he's going to score a touchdown and get the 1.5x multiplier, essentially. Would I do that? No. Because this offense is going to be significantly worse with no Dak Prescott, and that's exactly what sportsbooks are saying. So you're more than welcome to go take Lamb higher, lower, 16.5 receiving yards. And if you wanted to check out any of those picks over on Underdog Fantasy, of course, the link will be in the live chat. It'll be in the description, comment section. Code FLOCK. You'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, at the same time, you will actually get a free CJ Stroud pick, more than less than half a total yard for the game on Sunday night, and a free team review in the live stream that we are doing every single night. So you're more than welcome, if you think that Lamb's still a wide receiver 1, to go say he's going to have 60 receiving yards. Yours truly thinks he's a wide receiver 2 now instead with no Dak. So I win it. But let's go ahead and let's move it. This next thing, Damian Pierce, don't care. Brian Thomas Jr., Gabe Davis list is questionable. I'm assuming Thomas is good to go, but obviously with no Lawrence, you lower down expectations. Dallas Goedert, A.J. Brown, both fully good to go. That was expected. And it looks like London, more likely than not, is going to be playing this week. Let me just confirm we have London in these rankings, right? Yep, we have London at 11. London practice on Wednesday, practice on Thursday, and now they're feeling, quote-unquote, good about London playing Week 10. Jamal Williams re-aggravates the groin injury, unlikely to play Week 10. Chris Olave ruled out. That was expected. Justin Fields, don't care. Devonta Smith's going to play. Great for me. Juju Smith-Schuster ruled out. That was expected. Spears is good to go, not on the injury report anymore. Will Levis to start for the Titans this week. Let me go ahead and pull up the updated implied team totals that you have here in Tennessee. Let me see if this actually moved the needle. Because previously, you had the Tennessee Titans projected out to be the worst offense in the NFL this week with an implied team total of 15.5 points. And I want to see if they're still there after the Will Levis news. So here, you can always just go to little Google, type in Week 10 implied team totals, click any of the sites. They all pretty much do the same thing. This is aggregated from sportsbooks, so it's really useful data if you're trying to figure out what offenses should be good, what offenses should be garbage, and you still have the Titans projected out to be the worst offense in the NFL with an implied team total of 15.5 points. So I'd still probably be looking to avoid playing any Titans if you can. Just in case you're interested, the next worst offenses in order are supposed to be the Patriots, the Broncos, the Panthers, and then the Cowboys. This is why I picked up the Bears defense, and I'm very excited to start them this week in the Flock League. You have no Michael Pittman Jr. this week. So Downs, we already had as that must-start option about wide receiver 17. I mean, it looked like it was trending towards Pittman, more likely than not missing this week anyway. But let me just go ahead and officially put him at the very bottom of the rankings here to make sure everybody knows. Jalen McMillan, game time decision for Week 10. Definitely can't rely on him. Mike Evans ruled out. Assume we don't see Mike Evans till Week 13. Keon Coleman is out. And also, it looks like Keon Coleman is going to be missing some weeks. So we already have him at the very bottom of the wide receiver rankings this week. What I want to do probably is actually move Keon down the rest of season ranks at wide receiver. Because if you just think through this realistically, and it sucks, I drafted a lot of Keon Coleman in Underdog Best Ball drafts. But, we need to move Rome higher than this as well. I'd probably rather have Rome over Worthy. But anyway, I mean, if you realistically think through this with Keon, Keon has the bye week in Week 12. So if Keon misses this week, more likely than not, Keon's missing Week 11. Bye week, Week 12. I think you don't see Keon Coleman back until Week 13. So I think I'd probably rather have like Jamison Williams, Juwan Jennings. Hell, I'd probably rather have Xavier Legette over him as well. And honestly, I'd rather have Keenan Allen. I think you have to drop Keon and Pittman down considerably in the rest of season ranks with them missing this late in the season. Amari Cooper is questionable. We already know Dak got put on the IR. Adam Thielen is ruled out, so it definitely makes it a viable start if you wanted to look for Week 10 options in Carolina. Legette could be a play. We have Legette here sandwiched as like a low-end wide receiver 3 right next to the Chicago guys such as Keenan and Rome. The Lawrence not going to play. I'd be very surprised if he does, to be honest. I think that's all that we have for the injury updates today. Obviously, there was actually quite a bit. And it does seem, and I don't know if I'm wrong in saying this, maybe I just It's probably because I didn't update the rankings on the website every single day last season in terms of the weekly ranks. So maybe I just wasn't checking in as often as we are now and really updating the rankings daily. But I don't remember in years past us dealing with this many injuries late in the week and just trying to track who's playing, who's not playing, who's playing, who's not playing. I mean, I remember in years past having just as many, if not more, players actually go through and get listed as out for the season with season-ending injuries. But obviously, difference between that versus the guy not practicing on a Friday and us trying to figure out if they're going to play later in the week. But let's go ahead and let's move this over to our first question of the night. Coming out from Mother Flocka, always happy to see us. 16-team league, 4-5 record, and trade is with the number 2 team. We are 6-3. So, positive news, of course, with Nico Collins. Looks like Nico could potentially play this week. Definitely not a guarantee by any means, though. But going from Bijan to Nico, I'd probably rather have Bijan Robinson if Nico Collins was fully healthy. Then at that point, we could strongly consider it. However, going from T. Higgins to Aaron Jones is a very clear upgrade to the Aaron Jones side of things. So, honestly, I think it's a very fair deal. If I was sitting here at 6-3, I think you can take on the risk to go with the Nico side, especially as you get the positive news with Nico off the IR and back at practice today. Now, next question coming out from Yonda. This is Waddle, Brian Thomas for DK Metcalf. Let me just confirm, yeah, this is a 10-team league where you only start 2 wide receivers in a flex. Looks like we have enough depth to get by. So, yeah, we'll 100% go through and we'll make this deal. If it was a spot where Lawrence and Brian Thomas were both fully healthy, then I'd say probably not, because Brian Thomas and DK Metcalf at that point would be relatively close. But post Trevor Lawrence injury, obviously it is much tougher. Now, next question coming out from That Morris Kid. Always happy to see us. The Sup Mason, is this too much from Saquon? Much love, my guy. This is too much for Saquon Barkley. Myers is such a small piece in this deal. But if you're looking at this, I would be penciling these assets off as Barkley, the elite RB1, Taylor, low-end RB1, A.J. Brown, mid-wide receiver 1. For me, I think you have to hold on to the A.J. Brown, Taylor side, especially with the consideration. I know this team is loaded, but still, it's a 12-team league where you can start up to 4 wide receivers weekly. So the depth does matter a little bit more on this roster as well. Now, Evan coming out with their next trade question. This is Brooks, Pearsall, and Njoku for Tony Pollard. So definitely not a bad trade by any stretch of the imagination. Like, if you are going through and looking at this, it's hard to imagine Jonathan Brooks making a difference post $33 million extension for Chuba Hubbard. Ricky Pearsall, you have Juwan Jennings fully healthy, CMC healthy, Deebo Samuel healthy, George Kittle healthy. So obviously, while you have no brains at Ayuk, that's really the only guy missing time here. I think it really comes down to, what do we have at tight end? Can we afford to? Yeah, we have McBride. So I think you can afford to go get Pollard. I do want to reiterate, Pollard's in a garbage offense. You've had a ton of volume previously, but now it's probably going to be a lot tougher if Spears comes in and Spears has some usage as a receiver, even if we expect Pollard to have the majority of it. So we probably go Pollard here because obviously you're so damn strong at tight end, but it's not a super easy call. Now, Samuel coming out with our next question. This says, start sit. We need a flex between Bucky, Pollard, Downs, Brian Thomas, Nico Collins. If you get confirmation before the games that Nico Collins is good to go, obviously Nico Collins is the player that you want. However, if you don't get that confirmation, it probably would be pretty difficult relying on him, And in that instance, I think you're going to go Josh Downs. Looks like things are trending in the direction of Trevor Lawrence missing, of no Michael Pittman. So if you have no Lawrence, we're going to expect it's much worse offense at Jacksonville. If you have no Pittman, Downs just has a very safe target share here in this offense. So then we go ahead and we play Downs. Now, D-Mac coming out with our next question. So Trade says, in first place, trying to get ready for the playoffs. Okay. This is a 10-team league where you can start 4 wide receivers weekly. Wide receiver, we have Lamb, DK, Pickens, Myers, Deontay. For me, oh, dear God. Obviously, you have to prefer Derrick Henry over CMC at this point. Clearly, CMC has, a ceiling where he could be better than Derrick Henry. Obviously, if McCaffrey gets back to 90% of what he was last season, he is still the best player in fantasy football. Like, that's the crazy thing about McCaffrey. People remember him being number one, but you really have to put into the context that 90% of McCaffrey is still better than any option in fantasy. So McCaffrey does have that ceiling, but still you do have the uncertainty and you have the downside risk where I would rather have Henry over him. But if you're picking up Evans for free on this, on a playoff team, and it's a full PPR league, you can go with the CMC side. You're the one taking on the risk, though. We already know that Derrick Henry, of course, is the elite RB1 this season. But if you are a playoff team and we are considering what you're going to get from Mike Evans with no Chris Godwin, the expectation should be that Evans is a top 10 wide receiver. So I don't feel comfortable in saying it. I don't think it's an easy call by any means. I think you're the one taking on the risk, but I think we go CMC and Evans. Now, Brady Evans coming out with a start-sit question here. Wide receiver with no Keon Coleman, Shakir becomes a lot more appealing. And honestly, I think we probably go Shakir. And then I'll still go Harrison over Courtland Sutton. Harrison does have a really tough matchup, however, this week. Like, not super excited to get him in. And then going down to the flex, I was really hoping that we were going to have a running back that we were excited about. We're not particularly excited about Rachaad White. Rachaad White saves his day with the touchdown this past week, but the reality is probably not something that you're going to be super confident in repeating going into the future. It is a spot against the Niners where it is a bad matchup in general. Rachaad White's volume isn't particularly there. Rachaad White did give you 3 rushing attempts last week. But also at the same time, Sutton has a bad matchup. The Broncos project out to be a much worse offense than the Bucs, according to Vegas sportsbooks. And White's had the receiving role. So we're going to go with Rachaad White. Don't feel great about it, though. Now, Johnny Tsunami coming out says, running backs are Achane Warren. Wide receivers are A.J. Brown, Amari, Jennings, and McMillan. Going from Chase Brown to DeAndre Swift, honestly, a downgrade. Like, I have DeAndre Swift in the Flock League, but knowing his schedule that he has, where he has a month-long stretch where essentially he plays the Vikings and the Lions over and over and over again, I would rather have Brown in the much better offense with a larger receiving role as well. Gibbs versus Puka and Isaiah Pacheco, I'd probably rather have Gibbs. So I can see that we need a wide receiver with this team. But to be honest with you, I just think that Jahmyr Gibbs and Chase Brown are by far and away the best options. Like, give me Gibbs over Puka, give me Brown over Swift. And I don't know if Pacheco is going to move the needle for us. Now, Big Bot Zeke says, you reviewed the team on Monday. Is this viable? So the team is not linked here, my friend. So I'm sorry. I'm not going to remember this off the top of my head. So looking at this, I'm assuming that we are in a spot in which we want to be thinking about the fantasy football playoffs. Obviously, that's the type of asset that Mike Evans is, where we're going to assume that Evans, you get nothing for the next few weeks. But specifically in the fantasy football playoffs, we should kind of project him out to be a wide receiver one. With no Godwin, with how good Baker's been so far this season. I mean, presumably Evans could be a top 5 wide receiver. But Walker, top 10 running back rest of season. You're going to get the extra 2 games out of Walker in comparison. Nick Chubb doesn't particularly look startable at the moment. Pollard probably slides a bit with Spears coming back into the offense. So I probably stick with Kenneth Walker here. The scenario in which we do this, and I'm sorry, the team wasn't selected, so I can't see it here to just confirm. The scenario in which you'd want the Evans side is you are a fantasy football playoff roster and you're playing in a league where depth matters. That is the scenario in which it makes sense for you to go and trade the best asset with Kenneth Walker and go get the package of pieces, including the option that should be very good in the fantasy playoffs with Mike Evans. But in a vacuum, I'd rather have Walker. Now, Bong's Away coming out says $15 waiver, 15 waiver wire ad limit, only one left. Do we need the depth? Okay, this is a 12-team league where you start 2 wide receivers and 2 flexes. So, obviously, this was sent after the massive Jamar Chase game last night. And everybody in the chat right now and their mom's going to be screaming you want the Jamar Chase side. However, I play in this same style league where you can start up to 4 wide receivers weekly. And it's a 12-team format. So wide receiver depth actually does matter a decent amount. And if you only have one waiver wire move you can make rest of season here, then 100% I can see depth mattering more. So to be honest with you, I think you do this deal. If this was a 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, where the depth doesn't particularly matter, and instead it's all about just trying to get the highest upside player that you can inside the starting lineup, then maybe you're less excited about it. But in your league format, for the love of God, go get St. Brown and Malik Neighbors. Now, Real Superman coming out with our next question. Here, obviously, we have a couple auto start players that you just absolutely have to get in. We have the best, or some of the best running backs in fantasy with Kamara, Kyron, and Mixon. Play them every single week, regardless of the matchup. You don't think twice. Going over to wide receiver, A.J. Brown looks like he is off the injury report and good to go. And you just have a literal insane team. We already freaking played Jamar Chase. And then going down to tight end, we have Kate Otten. So, yes, congrats on scoring 200 points this week. Legitimately, if you lose this, I would have to assume that you're playing in a league with 4 teams. Now, Breezy coming out says, no brainer. However, it's a 1-keeper league. What are your thoughts? My thoughts are I'd rather have Malik Neighbors rest of season than CeeDee Lamb. I think both wide receivers are in bad offenses, but honestly, I think Daniel Jones is better than Cooper Rush. And at the same time, Malik Neighbors is leading the NFL in targets per game. And Jonathan Brooks looks to be the RB2 in one of the worst offenses in the NFL, whereas Josh Jacobs is a 3-down RB in one of the best offenses in the league. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take the Neighbors and Jacobs side. Even if it's a 1-player keeper league, it's not like we're bummed about keeping Malik Neighbors next season, of course. Now let's move this over to our next question coming out from Dominic. It says, got London and Tracy for Myers, Moore, Mason. Well, that's just phenomenal. Running back, we for sure start Aaron Jones. Tracy is a great matchup as well. Both running backs, great matchups. Both running backs, 3-down options. Aaron Jones, a slightly better receiver and better offense. Wide receiver, looks like we're going to go London. He is trending towards playing. Actually, no. London Debo will be close, but honestly, I think you play both receivers. I think you throw one into the flex spot. Good call going Kyle Pitts over Mike Gesicki. Honestly, I probably myself would have played Gesicki last night, but clearly would have been the wrong call. And if you wanted to go Tracy here over one of the receivers in the flex, I'm not going to fault you for it. Obviously, Tracy is just set up in an absolute smash spot going up against the Carolina Panthers in finally a game where the Giants are favored. Now, Bardu says, my playoffs start week 14. Dear God. If your playoffs start week 14, it's a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, 10-team league. I honestly think I would just take George Kittle, who is by far and away the tight end 1 in fantasy, and is only going to be better going into the future, where you're in a spot in which you have no Ayuk rest of season. I mean, I don't even know if there's anything else to say here. Other than, please, next season. Because I know, obviously, we all used to play in leagues where playoffs were weeks 14, 15, 16. But when the NFL adds the extra game, you have to add the extra game to your regular fantasy football season as well. You have to talk to the commissioner about changing it. It's too late to do it this season. But for next season, you'll have to change it where instead y'all play weeks 15, 16, 17 for the playoffs. Now, BZ Young says, Nico out and Mac Jones starting. We need help with the flex. Nico's not officially out yet. If Nico plays, obviously we want to get Nico in there. If not, if you are comparing, say, Ramondre Stevenson versus, I guess the next best option would be Brian Thomas Jr. It is a lot tougher, of course, given the fact that you have no Lawrence. And honestly, since you have no Lawrence, I'd probably go Ramondre if Nico doesn't play. Now, obviously, it is going to be something that you do have to monitor here, though, because Nico was at practice and is off the IR, so he has a shot to play Sunday night. Now, to be honest with you, I'm really hoping he doesn't play. I would have to play him against him in the Flock League, but also at the same time, you know what? Your boy dropped 55 points with Jamar Chase, so it may not matter. Now, Goose coming out with our next question says, Coop, Brian Thomas Jr. at wide receiver 2, and Naj, Brian Robinson, or any streaming options. I think your options are probably better than streamers. I'm going to go with CJ Stroud here at quarterback. The issue with Herbert at QB this week is playing the Titans. It really is a spot in which the Chargers, we should expect that they're just going to be able to run the ball over and over again. If Amari does play with no Keon Coleman in Buffalo, I would rather play Amari with Josh Allen than I would with Brian Thomas Jr. with no Trevor Lawrence. And then going down to the flex, you have no Brian Robinson. He has already been ruled out. So I think you go ahead, you presumably play Najee Harris, but you also could play Brian Thomas Jr. if you wanted to. Obviously, it's just a tough spot with how bad the offense should be. Now, Daryl Moody coming out with our next question. Says, also could substitute Tracy with Brian Robinson. I would probably rather send Brian Robinson than Tracy at this point. If I'm looking at DK Metcalf versus CeeDee Lamb, I probably prefer Lamb with the hope that Dak is able to come back for the fantasy football playoffs. Because obviously if that does happen, then at that point with with CeeDee Lamb, he goes back to being a high-end wide receiver 1 in fantasy. However, if you were to get no Dak in, DK is probably better from a points per game perspective. But you do get the extra game out of Lamb, who's already gone through the bye in week 7 in comparison to DK having to go through it this week. So not a super easy call by any means. Dear God. I'd probably stick with the Lamb side with the hope and the prayer that Dak Prescott is able to make it back. I mean, if you could make this deal by just sending Lamb to get DK and Jacobs, then yeah, it's a no-brainer. Let's go get the package. But if you're selling like Tracy, say, to get Jacobs, it's definitely an upgrade there at RB. I just don't know if it's enough. Like, if we knew 100% Dak's not coming back, then yes, you make the deal. So that's your opinion. You can't go for it. Now, Justice Man coming out with our next question says, I'm 3-6, still fighting, leaning Flacco. What are your thoughts? You go Mahomes. Flacco in a tough matchup, no rushing upside, no Michael Pittman Jr. I think it would be a very bad call to go Flacco over Mahomes. I mean, with Mahomes, you at least have a little rushing upside. Can we see what the projections look like right now? Mahomes is higher or lower, 17.95 fantasy points on Underdog. Flacco is higher or lower, 14.65. Yeah, in my mind, there's no way you can go Flacco here. No way. Running back, we are going to go ahead. We will play Mixon as an auto start. Tracy as a really strong play against the Panthers. Wide receiver, it looks like London will be good to go. We're going to play Pickens here as well. Tight end, we have Kelsey. In the flex spots, this is where things kind of get ugly. I guess we go Rome Odunze and Jordan Addison. And really hope you get T. Higgins back next week, because Higgins coming back next week will make this team significantly better. Now, Sam Bronco's coming out with our next question here. This is Evans versus Kenneth Walker. It's Kenneth Walker pretty easily for me. I mean, I think both are number one options at their respective positions. Like, I do think you should expect Kenneth Walker's an RB1 rest of season. Evans, once he's back in week 13, should be a wide receiver one as well. But you're presumably going to get the 2 extra games from Kenneth Walker than you would Mike Evans. I'm assuming that Evans is missing both weeks 10, 11, and then you maybe get him back in week 12, if not week 13. But yeah, I think you go with Walker over Evans. If you wanted Evans, I think you have to get an extra piece added on, because you are taking on the risk there. Now, Holy Hero coming out with our next question. I'm assuming they're just meaning, who do we start between Barkley and Neighbors? I'll go through and I'll rank the options here for you just to make sure that we are on the same page, because I don't know exactly what you want from me. Barkley, obviously, by far and away the best player out of this entire list. Then afterwards at running back, we would go Tracy, then Ramondre, then Dowdle last. Wide receiver, we would go Neighbors, then Dell, and then Brian Thomas Jr. And in terms of how we would view them for the flex, I would go Barkley, Tracy, then Dell, then Ramondre, and then Brian Thomas Jr., then Dowdle. So, don't know exactly what you're asking for there, but hopefully we were able to help. Jawit Hoodie, always happy to see us, says, is this worth it? This is a deal where we send A.J. Brown to upgrade to Justin Jefferson, and we send George Kittle to downgrade to Komet. I don't think you can, to be honest. Like, for me, I am viewing George Kittle as an elite asset here at tight ends, where he had already been by far and away the best tight end in fantasy football. And then you have the Brandon Ayuk injury expanding the target share and what you should expect you get here for Kittle. So I think you have to go with the Kittle side. Now, just coming out says, versus Lamar and A.J. Brown, pick my wide receiver 2 in the flex options. So so I'm assuming that we only play 2 receivers and not 3. We are going to go with Tyreek. And I don't really care about us playing against AJ Brown and determining if we play Devonta Smith or not. Going down to the flex right now, we have Brian Thomas, Najee. So honestly, I think you're going to play Terry or Smith at wide receiver 2, and it doesn't matter. And then you go with the other option there at the flex. Brian Thomas probably would be a play for me over Terry and Devonta Smith if you had Lawrence, especially in a matchup against Minnesota where they have allowed a ton of points to opposing wide receivers this season. But I think it would be a very tough spot with no Lawrence, of course. Now, Travis coming out with our next question says, hopefully the last trade question. Stroud's the quarterback. Running back, we have Etienne, Jacobs, Chuba. We would get the Chase side. Okay, so A.J. Brown to Chase. Jamar Chase, clear upgrade. The thing is, are we just... I'm not intending to use a pun, but are we just chasing the Jamar points? Realistically, going into the future, what's the difference points per game wise between Jamar Chase and A.J. Brown? And I say this as someone who has Jamar Chase on their team. I say this as someone who hopes the points per game difference is 10 plus. But reality is probably 2 to 3. Jamar, you still have to go through the bye week in week 12 versus A.J. Brown's already through it. Now, of course, I would very easily prefer Jamar Chase over A.J. Brown rest of season. I just don't know if we want to be paying a massive premium to get that upgrade. Like how I would view this is, would I pay A.J. Brown and Tank Dell to get to Jamar Chase? Yes, of course I would. But then the second piece of this, where you are going through and we are sending Gibbs to Chase Brown, clear downgrade, just to get Kyler Murray on it and a depth wide receiver. I would still probably rather the Gibbs and Brown side. Quarterback, we are rostering a bunch. It's a 1 QB league. Side note, drop these quarterbacks. I promise you have better options on the waiver wire. Can y'all spam the chat? What side would y'all rather have here? Would you rather have Jahmyr Gibbs, A.J. Brown, Tank Dell? Or would you rather have Kyler Murray, Chase Brown, Jamar Chase, and Jacoby Myers? What side are you going with in the chat? Gibbs, A.J. Brown, Tank Dell, or Kyler, Chase Brown, Jamar Chase, Jacoby? We got AJ, Gibbs, Jamar, Gibbs, Chase, Gibbs, Gibbs. For me, I think it's the Gibbs side. If you wanted to make this deal, I understand that you need a quarterback, but still, I just don't think you can include. If you really wanted to go get Jamar Chase, this is what it is. If you really wanted to go for Chase, I think you go ahead and see if you could swing A.J. Brown, Tank Dell for Jamar Chase. And then regardless if you make this move or not, you got to drop the backup quarterbacks that we have. Now, Ray coming out our next question says, Etienne, Gibbs, Jefferson, Dell, or Etienne, Montgomery, Jefferson, Nico. Definitely the Nico side. Like Montgomery over Dell by a wide margin. Nico, Gibbs, relatively close. Obviously, sucks that you may have to go through another week here with no Nico Collins, but he's now officially off the IR. He's at practice. So it does look like you have a realistic shot to get him in. Let's go over to our next question. This is coming out from Nizik. Here we need 2 flexes. So Dobbins, Tracy, Puka are really the options we're looking at. I think we go Puka here for one of the flexes, locked and loaded. And then the other call is maybe where it gets a little bit tougher. Where I think if you're going to be looking at specifically Dobbins, he's in a better offense. They both obviously have great matchups. They both have great workloads. I would go Dobbins if you had no Gus Edwards. If Gus Edwards plays, I think it's enough to swing it to Tyrone Tracy. But again, I think plan A is Dobbins. And if Edwards would be good to go, you possibly expect him to just take a couple touches. And Tracy is just in an absolute smash spot here, of course, going up against the Carolina Panthers and a game environment in which the Giants should be able to run the ball over and over and over again. Now, going over to our next question, it's coming out from Trent, says, he also offered DK and Swift for Devonta Smith. Oh, I would definitely take DK and Swift for Devonta Smith easily. That's the deal. Hey, don't bother with this other garbage. If this is what he offered you, you take this. Like, please, let's go get DeAndre Swift and DK Metcalf. I mean, if you are looking at Smith here, he's been great, but at the same time, you potentially have to be a little bit concerned that the touchdown regression hits. And at the same time, as you get Dallas Goedert into this offense, potentially it takes a target or 2 away from Devonta Smith. Now, Sidekick coming out with our next question. Non-PPR, we need to start 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and a flex. Concerned with Nico, CMC being used on a snap count. Please, for the love of God, if you have CMC playing. Actually, no, never mind. If you have Jonathan Taylor here, JT is a must-start option. And I would play CMC over Montgomery if you were looking at a full PPR format. Non-PPR format, I think you make an argument for Montgomery here. Going over to wide receiver, you don't have to worry about it. You go ahead and you take AJ. This is an insane team. I think you go AJ Brown, Drake London. And then down in the flex in a non-PPR. Actually, no, you go AJ Brown, Cooper Kupp. I apologize. And down in the flex in a non-PPR format, you're going to go with the running back. You're going to take CMC. As the thing with McCaffrey is, if the Niners get to the goal line, they are going to do everything they can specifically to give McCaffrey that touchdown. That's what pretty much everybody on that team will want. And non-PPR format, really the only thing that you are chasing is touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. And I think CMC has a really good shot at giving you that. Now, Dimo coming out with their next question says, London let me down the last few games. Bounce back versus New Orleans. Or do we play Kupp since he's been good so far? I think you play Kupp because you have no injury concerns. Going down to the flex friggin' sucks. I would love to play London here. I do think that London is in a massive bounce back spot going up against the Saints, who have thrown in the towel, who just traded away Marshawn Lattimore. But realistically speaking, obviously we can't bench a 3-down back like Joe Mixon. It's just not possible. Now, Season Over says they offered Hunt and Lamb or Kupp for Lamar. I have Cousins. For me, I'd rather have Lamar at this point. If you were going to trade for a receiver, you'd rather have Kupp over Lamb. I mean, I had Lamb as a top 2 wide receiver in my rest of season ranks before this past week. But you just simply can't ignore the fact that the Dak Prescott injury is going to collapse this offense. Like, the Dak Prescott injury is going to have a very similar effect, not the same one for one, But the Dak injury is going to have a similar effect to what we saw with the Tua injury in Miami, where I think it would be very difficult to be excited about CeeDee Lamb here. I'd rather just have Lamar. Adam, super happy to see you, my guy, says 4-5, 18% playoff chance, rest of season question. Someone offered me this. Team is Darnold, Cousins, Henry, CMC, Lamb, McLaurin, Gesicki, Pitts, Montgomery, Downs. We're up 21 going up against a 7-2 opponent. So this is a 10-team, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league, which makes this easy. We have enough depth on this team, while at the same time, depth doesn't particularly matter. Expectations from a points per game perspective rest of season is, if you are looking at Nico Collins, this is a top 3-ish wide receiver in points per game rest of season. Now, obviously, I don't have him there in my rest of season rankings because there's a chance he misses this week. You know he misses week 14, whereas Lamb's already through the bye. But if we think about this, even if you were to potentially have no Nico Collins this week, you're still starting McLaurin and, dear God, I'd love to keep Downs if possible. We need another starter. Let's look at the other options that we have here. So hypothetically, starting lineup this week, we have Derrick Henry, CMC, then David Montgomery in the flex. Our 2 wide receivers, we'd have Terry and presumably Juwan Jennings if Nico Collins doesn't play. But I think with the Dak news, you just kind of have to go ahead. You have to take Nico here. If this was a 12-team format where you started 4 wide receivers every single week, then at that point, I think it would be much tougher for me to say go with Nico Collins, especially on a team where we are currently 4-5, so we can't focus in on long-term upside and we need points right this second. But I think the discrepancy here is large enough in points per game between Nico and Lamb rest of season, where it's an easy call to go with Nico. But I really appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way. Let me hook you up with a free trade question. That way, if you ever have anything else that you want to send my way, don't hesitate. You're more than able to. Now, let's move this over to a free team review coming out from Shot by Dono. Thank you for taking advantage of that underdog offer. My guy says, hey, Mason, looking for some advice on how we can load up for the playoffs. We lost Rasheed and Ayuk early, so my bench is pretty sparse, but looking for some trade ideas to secure some kind of solid flex options. So right now we are 4th in the league analyzer, and really there is that kind of grouping here, 2 through 4, that are all about the same. The team at 1 is an absolute juggernaut. The team at 1 has Kyron, CMC, Chase, AJ Brown. So it will be tough to go up against them. But we are 6-3. And with this being a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex league, it may just be a little bit easier for us to go ahead and overcome the Rashee Rice and Ayuk injuries because wide receiver depth isn't going to matter as much. But also it's going to make things a little more difficult for us to go through and make plays inside the starting, make trades to get improvements inside the starting lineup because we don't have the wide receiver depth pieces. Now, anyway, starting off at quarterback, 12-team league, so we're okay here. If it was a 10-team league, we'd be garbage. Am I going to act like we're super strong with the combo Sam Darnold and CJ Stroud? Of course not. If you are looking at Stroud, I do think it'll be better once you get Nico Collins back in, but obviously he has been very bad so far. But yeah, just keep on playing Darnold for the time being, and then once we get Nico back in here, maybe we can pivot back over to Stroud. Now, going over to what you have at running back. We are currently sitting with HN as well as Kenneth Walker. So we have 2 running back ones rest of season. The depth, maybe Brooks turns out to be somewhat interesting here. We will see. Bucky Irving, they both kind of fall in a similar mold, right? Where if you were extremely, extremely desperate, we can assume that you could go through and you could look to start one of these running backs. But more so, they're probably just kind of like the premium handcuff RBs, where if you were to get injured to Rachaad White, I'd be very confident in putting Bucky Irving in my lineup. If you were to get an injury to Chuba Hubbard, I'd be very confident putting Jonathan Brooks in. We can say the same thing, presumably, with Zach Charbonnet, of course. And then Khalil Herbert, I think, is kind of a sneaky handcuff here. Obviously, Herbert fumbles at the very beginning of this past week, doesn't see the field again. But I definitely wouldn't be like giving up on Khalil Herbert by any means because of that. He had been with the team for like 2 days, right? And it was like kind of a miscommunication fumble. I think it's a little excusable. So I think you have just a premium handcuff back there effectively. Going over to what we're looking at wide receiver, we currently are sitting with another wide receiver 1 in Amon-Ra St. Brown. So comfortable spot. We have Terry McLaurin as a comfortable wide receiver 2. The wide receiver depth is extremely limited. Now, for me, I'm fine chasing the wide receiver depth pieces that we perceive to have some upside here. So looking at somebody like Jalen McMillan, I see a very clear path where you have the Godwin injury. There's a chance that he cements himself as an every down player in a high volume passing attack. And I could see you starting him in the future. My thing with Noah Brown is, what path do you ever have to put Noah Brown into your starting lineup? Like for me, I would definitely prefer to go through and roster Dontavian Wicks if you really wanted that additional wide receiver. I don't really care that we have Terry McLaurin in how we allocate this bottom wide receiver slot. Looking at what we have with another possibility, we can acknowledge, you know what, we're not playing McMillan this week. He has the bye week next week anyway. Or we'll leave McMillan. We don't even need to play around with him. But maybe instead of picking up Dontavian Wicks, who's currently on bye, maybe you say, okay, well, we can pick him up after his bye if we really want to. So instead, I think you could like throw a Hail Mary here. Go ahead, drop Noah Brown, pick up either Braylon Allen or Ray Davis. Pick up a running back that has a very clear path to getting into your starting lineup if you were to get that injury to the guy in front of him. That guy that could also see a massive spike in value depending on how things broke. Going over to tight end, obviously we have an elite tight end with Bowers. You have to have Hunter Henry to fill in for the bye week this week, but then after that, probably fine letting Henry go. So I think this is a really strong team. It's a league in which wide receiver depth doesn't particularly matter. We're not optimized around wide receiver depth, which is really nice to see. I think the only thing that I would do myself here is I would drop Noah Brown. I'd pick up Braylon Allen. And then after this week, I'd presumably drop Hunter Henry and pick up a wide receiver off the waiver wire, such as Dontavian Wicks, or whoever turns out to be your favorite wide receiver option at that point. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. I wish I had a trade that we could make. Like, I would love to sell a wide receiver depth piece in these league settings with a quarterback to go get a stud QB, but the issue is we just can't afford to make that move, right? We don't have the wide receiver depth because of the injuries. So I think you're already in a very comfortable situation in terms of roster construction. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. And again, thank you so much for taking advantage of that free underdog offer. Now, Nelson coming out with our next question says, waivers are fair. Not sure to start in the flex. Thanks. So thank you. Looking at the flex, this is ugly. We have no Olave. Laporta looks disgusting. Najee's dominating touches over Jalen Warren. Even if Jonathan Brooks does play his first game back from an ACL, we have no interest in. You know what? I'd probably rather go with Keenan Allen. Obviously, Caleb's looked pretty bad over the past few weeks. But at the same time, if you're looking at sportsbooks at the moment, they are giving the Chicago Bears a considerable amount of credit this week in particular to be in a bit of a bounce back spot. Keenan Allen did have, I believe, 10 targets last week. So am I super excited to start Keenan Allen in a vacuum? Of course not. But here, I think if we're comparing him to guys like Jonathan Brooks, Jalen Warren, and Sam Laporta, you have to. Now, Julian coming out with our next question. 4 and 5 must win this week. Do we pull the trigger? This is DK in London versus Justin Jefferson. This is a 12-team league, so waiver wire options aren't going to be great. But you do only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. It seems like London's going to be back, but honestly, if it's a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex format, I'm completely fine with you going and getting Jefferson here. It's not like depth matters a ton in this format. And at the same time, you do have Jefferson through the bye week already. Whereas if you compare that to what you have with Metcalf, who's on bye this week, London still has the bye in week 14. I think you can go ahead and I think you can take the Jefferson side in your scenario with these league settings. Now let's move this over to our next question coming out from J.K. Lou. Here at running back, Tracy is going to be the easy play. Even with no Brian Robinson, I would have a hard time playing Eckler over Tracy. Eckler will split the backfield. Tracy is a much better matchup. Tracy is a much better running back at this point of their careers. Going down to the flex, this is where things get difficult. Before Brian Robinson was ruled out, I think George Pickens was the very easy call. Now that you have no Brian Robinson, I think you can talk yourself into Austin Eckler here. Can y'all please spam the chat? Would y'all rather have Eckler or George Pickens this week? Are you going to go Eckler or George Pickens in your flex spot? Eckler obviously was great this past week with no Robinson, but earlier in the season we saw Eckler with no Robinson and McNichols had everything. We got Eckler, Pickens, Eckler, Pickens, Eckler, Pickens, Eckler, Pickens, Eckler, Pickens. It's probably what I would stick with here as well. Just wanted to make sure that I wasn't completely off. But yeah, I think you just roll with Pickens. Obviously, you've had more passing volume in Pittsburgh since Russ has taken over. Bengals fan since 05, always happy to see us, says, happy Burrow popped off yesterday. Not sure who to play in the flex spot. Keep up the great content. Thank you. I will admit I was rooting for your Bengals last night. I think the NFL would have been more fun with the Bengals in playoff contention. Obviously, the Ravens are already going to be in the playoffs. I think the Bengals would be a much better wild card team than a lot of the other teams that will be battling it out for that spot now. But anyway, we had the Burrow pop, so it's not like we need a crazy high ceiling down here in the flex. We had no Higgins. We have no Moss. I think, honestly, you just go with the wide receivers where we know there will be target volume. I feel confident in saying to go through and play Khalil Shakir. Because, I mean, if we are looking at Shakir here, this is a wide receiver that obviously is an elite offense. Not only is he in an elite offense, but at the same time, you're in a spot in which you have no Keon Coleman, so he should have a larger role in general. I don't love the Sutton play, though, with it being a bad offense, while at the same time, you have a tough matchup going up against the Chiefs here. Now, going over to our next question, coming out from Husky. Appreciate you. Going to be excited to check this out. And we actually just rolled this into the site. So let me see if I can work this. Perfect. It works like a charm. Let's see. Is there anybody else? Let's go. Brian Thomas Jr. Bam. Did this take me to whoever has Brian Thomas Jr.? Maybe? It was the same team, so I'm sorry. We're testing stuff out here. The devs just put this update out. Mahomes. Bam. Okay. It's working. It's working. But I appreciate you, my guy. You're going to be excited to check this out. Let me hook you up with both a free trade question as well as a free start sit question, just in case there's something that I don't cover with this that you'd want to follow up on. But it says, my team looks great on paper, but the bye weeks and really bad luck in points against. I'm on the outside looking into the playoffs. Just traded Connor and Jameson for Amon-Ra somehow, and I'm looking for some more moves to make. Been trying to package Adams and Pollard for another RB1, but nobody is biting. Okay. Well, really appreciate you. And I do like the deal. And the thing is, you are in such a good spot in this league where typically, I mean, I can just tell even before we pull up the team looking at the league analyzer, teams in your scenario with this kind of roster, it is going to be difficult for us to convince our league mates to make trades with us. Where if we are looking at our team, we have Saquon Barkley, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Davante Adams, DK Metcalf, Jaden Daniels. This team has so much value. This team is by far and away the best team in this league. It's crazy that we are currently sitting at 4-5. Obviously, we haven't had this roster the entire season, but still. Quarterback, we are currently rolling with Jaden Daniels. When you look at Daniels here, you have the rushing upside. He is on the Mount Rushmore of elite quarterbacks, where you start him every single week, regardless of the matchup. We don't need a backup. For his bye week, we'll go ahead and we'll pick up somebody for that individual week. But outside of that, obviously, we are just simply not concerned. Going over to what we have at running back, we have the elite RB1 with Saquon Barkley already through his bye. We have Dobbins already through his bye, who's expanded his role here as well. So I 100% agree that like the play to make here with this roster is identifying, well, we have so many running back depth pieces. We can afford to give up one of the running backs that maybe isn't a lock for RB1 production, but looks more like an RB2, and go get an upgrade elsewhere in this lineup. And I understand wanting to go through and sell Tony Pollard with the expectation, if Spears comes in, then at that point, presumably, we could expect that Pollard does see a step backwards with his role. I like the idea of selling Tony Pollard. But if you find that none of your league mates want to buy him, there's still no harm in going through and deciding, let me instead see if anybody will bite on J.K. Dobbins. Let me see if anybody will bite on Ramondre Stevenson. Because going through and selling them is effectively the same thing here from a roster construction perspective. Now, going over to what we have at wide receiver, we are elite at the very top, of course. We have Jefferson, we have St. Brown, both of whom are already through their bye weeks. We have Davante Adams, DK Metcalf, so we have plenty of depth here at wide receiver. So I am right in line with you. If you could go through and if you could potentially take that running back depth piece and that wide receiver depth piece and just go get an elite flex play by going ahead and selling, say, Selling Pollard and Devontae Adams in a 2-for-1 deal, we would. But if your league mates aren't biting, I don't think we stop there. I think you just try to get creative with a couple different trades. Like another thing that I think would make a ton of sense for your roster is how we're sitting here in a spot in which you have the elite running backs, wide receivers, and the depth at the positions as well. You very easily could afford to go through and look to get an upgrade at the tight end position. So to be honest with you, what I would really want to do is I would want to approach one of the teams that has a top tight end here. Like I would want to go over to this team with Trey McBride where their wide receiver room is a little bit lacking with no Evans right now, with no Reed. They're starting, say, Brian Thomas, Zay Flowers this week. And if you could go through and give them a new wide receiver one, if you could go ahead and potentially send them, say, Devontae Adams and Dalton Kincaid, or maybe you send them Tony Pollard. I mean, their running back 3 is Tank Bigsby. If you can send them Tony Pollard and Dalton Kincaid to go get McBride, it's a move that really doesn't negatively impact your team in any way. And at the same time, it gives you the elite tight ends. And if that owner isn't interested in Tony Pollard, no harm, no foul. We have a bunch of different running backs we could send them in that category. Instead, see if they want Dobbins. Instead, see if they want Ramondre. So if you could send like Pollard and Kincaid to go get McBride, and then we can go through and we can do this with a bunch of different teams, right? It doesn't have to be McBride. Going through and looking at this Bowers team, their running back 2 is Najee. So if you wanted to go ahead and if you wanted to try to send them, say, and they don't really have a lot of wide receiver depth either. If you want to send them a depth wide receiver and a depth tight end to go ahead and get the upgrade there at tight end, that's probably what we want to be doing, to be honest with you. And I think the teams with the elite tight ends are honestly kind of perfect trade partners with us. The only team I could, and even the team with Kittle had the Olave injury. So again, I want to reiterate, I do sign off. I think that your deal of sending the running back and wide receiver depth pieces in a 2-for-1 trade to just get a better flex would be great. But I think you can stay a little bit more flexible with it and see if the teams are interested in a running back not named Pollard. While at the same time, we could also explore the possibility of getting the elite tight end instead. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. I did hook you up with both a free trade question and a free start sit question as well, just in case there was anything else that you wanted me to check out, my guy. But Chasen Breeze coming out with our next question says, hi, pick 2 PPR, Debo, Lamb, or Adams. We're going to go Debo and Adams, to be honest with you. And then 4-point passing touchdown format, are we going to go Kirk, Sam, or CJ? Here, I'm definitely not going to go with Stroud if Nico misses. It's going to be between Darnold and Cousins. I probably go Darnold with him having a really strong matchup this week going up against the Jags. But Tiny Dancer, always happy to see you, always happy to see the name. Says, what kind of stat line does Hopkins need to get this weekend to get his trade value to be an RB1? So it's always going to be difficult for the player that comes from kind of being a meaningless option at wide receiver to go through and give you 2 strong weeks to become worth a running back 1 in fantasy in trades. Now, obviously, Hopkins is a very unique player in that Hopkins is, I don't want to say a borderline Hall of Famer, but I mean, Hopkins obviously has the pedigree. And it was a very clear story that you can tell of if Hopkins comes out and he's a wide receiver one yet again this week, and go, okay, well, it's all Tennessee's fault. Hopkins now has the elite quarterback play for the first time since he played back in Houston with Deshaun. Deshaun Watson was elite back in the day, believe it or not. If I just had a guess here, and obviously I'm throwing out a guess, for him to get ranked among the running back ones, and we can just, let's go look at my rest of season ranks here. Let's do that for fun. So, or we'll do should we just do the expert average? Let's just do the expert average on the site. The expert average on the site, the running back ones, I have Alvin Kamara ranked way higher than this. I don't know what the hell these other guys are smoking. But to be treated as if you are equivalent to about a running back one in fantasy, like the wide receiver 11 with Kupp is ranked back-to-back with the running back 12 in Jonathan Taylor. So Hopkins would have to find a way to get up to the Cooper Kupp, Drake London range in rankings. For me to move Hopkins there, it's going to be hard for me to do that. I think we would need for sure, double-digit targets at the very minimum, 100 receiving yards, and multiple receiving touchdowns. Because just looking at my rankings here in particular, like if Hopkins comes through with, say, if Hopkins came through with double-digit targets, 100 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown too, I could presumably move him ahead of Lamb, Debo. So I think that could get it done. But I think you need double-digit targets. I think you need the touchdown. And presumably 100 receiving yards. But I'm just absolutely guessing, my guy. Now, next question coming out from K. Soliner. Appreciate you. Says, I got CMC returning this week. So we have Kamara and CMC for running backs with Charbonnet, Algier, and Etienne on the bench. So Sutton is almost a zero at this point. We are effectively trading Tracy for Devonta Smith. If you would start Smith at wide receiver, I don't fault you at all for making this move. Obviously, it's a tough week to sell Tracy with Tracy going up against Carolina. We're going to assume this is the perfect spot for him. You probably get a career best game. And honestly, maybe you could squeeze out a little bit more value if we decided to wait another week. But if you would start Smith in there at wide receiver, I think you can go ahead and take Smith. The thing to keep in mind is the touchdown rate may look just a little bit unsustainable at this point, while at the same time you are looking at a wide receiver that should see some additional target competition with Dallas Goedert coming back into this offense, even if it's not going to be a ton. But I appreciate you. Let me hook you up with the free trade question. That way next time you send something in, it is on the house, my guy. And somebody else that we need to hook up with some free stuff. Hellboy Jordan, I believe, is maybe number 2 on the leaderboard this month. My guy, I appreciate you, of course. Let me hook you up with both a free trade and a free start set question. Coming through says, 12-team non-PPR. Starting K-Dot at tight end. Do we start Kincaid over White in the flex? Never started 2 tight ends, but it's tempting. Kudos on the Chase blow up, by the way. Thank you, my guy. And yes, I am. I was living on cloud 9 after the game last night. Literally, I've cared more about this fantasy football league that we've been doing this season more than any fantasy football league that I've cared about since I was probably 15 years old. It's like over a decade. I don't think I've had a fantasy football league I've cared about as much as this one. And it has been so much fun. But anyway, looking at this, for me, non-PPR format, the only thing that we are doing is chasing touchdown upside. The touchdowns have been there with Rachaad White, of course. Just because they have been there doesn't mean it's a guarantee to be going into the future. You only had 3 carries this past week for Rachaad White. It is a tough matchup as well, going up against the Niners, of course. Can we look at what the underdog picks are here? I'd probably play White. I'm probably going to go White over Cup. I'm sorry, not Cup, obviously. White over Kincaid. Kincaid right now is higher or lower 9.15 fantasy points. We'd assume that the reception volume's about similar between the two. Whereas, do they have something with Rachaad White? Yes, they do. I'm just blind. White is higher or lower 9.25 fantasy points. So they have them pretty much in line. I'm never wanting to play the tight end. I think you go K-Dot at tight end. And I think you go Rachaad White there in the flex. It's definitely close. Of course, you also have no Keon Coleman this week. So no Keon. You can raise expectations with pretty much all pass catchers in Buffalo, including what you should have here, of course, with I apologize. What you should have with Kincaid. But Evan coming out with a massive dono. Really appreciate you. Let me hook you up with a bunch of free stuff, my guy. Let me get you a free trade question. Let me get you a free start sit question. Let me get you a free team review. That way, next time you send one in, it is on the house. Says, hey, Mason, coming back for a 5th team review. I'm 5-4. Said double flex league. I had to dump Dak and we're streaming quarterback. Soon we'll be getting Nico back, so I'm trying to see if we could shop Sutton. I need suggestions on how to upgrade the team. If you could shop Sutton, 100% I would want to. The issue is, it's just much easier said than done. Like, I know Sutton's obviously coming off the very strong week this past week, but you go back 2 weeks ago and the man had a goose egg. I think it would be very difficult to convince a league mate to go through and buy Sutton. This is the We Don't Suck Much team. We are currently 2nd in the league analyzer. I don't remember where we were last time, but this is a league where there are pretty much 2 juggernaut teams, but it does look like everybody is pretty close, so it should be an even league in general. And this is a league with 2 flex spots, so the depth does matter a little bit more, particularly wide receiver depth. So if you were ever going to be able to go through and if you were ever going to be able to sell Cortland Sutton, it would be in this league because Sutton actually does matter a bit here. Now, going over to what we have with quarterback, we are effectively just streaming. Right now, the guys we're rolling with are May and Bo Nix, which I'm completely fine with. I mean, obviously, May has shown us rushing upside. If we are looking at Bo Nix, I do think that the spike weeks we've had from him maybe are a little bit, just a little bit more due to how good the matchups were earlier in the season for him. But regardless, we can play the matchups between these 2 options, of course. Going over to what we have with our running backs. We are currently sitting with 2 RB1s with Kyron Taylor. Hopefully Brooks coming in gives you something here. And then obviously Raheem Mostert, a depth spot where if you really needed to start somebody, you can, but more likely than not, you're more so just looking at him as an option that could be a premium handcuff if anything were to occur to Achane. Now, going over to what we have at wide receiver. We have Nico coming back in, which should help the team a ton. Nico back at practice today. Looks like there's a chance he plays Sunday night. Obviously, we do not know right now, though. We have Terry McLaurin. We get the DeAndre Hopkins pop. Brian Thomas does get hit, but knowing our running back room, it's probably a league in which you need to start 4 wide receivers weekly. Like, I think you're going to be starting wide receivers in the flex. So to be completely honest with you, I actually think that Sutton may make a little bit of a difference with your team here in particular. And going back to what we were talking about previously, where we're not expecting you to get much for Sutton, I would probably just hold him on the team anyway, because we go through and look at this. Nico has not gone through his bye. Terry hasn't gone through his bye. Brian Thomas hasn't gone through his bye. Cortland Sutton himself hasn't gone through the bye, so it actually does make a little bit of a difference. In terms of any pivots with the waiver wire options, for me, I would for sure drop I dropped Tyler Lockett, where if you are looking at Lockett, it's a wide receiver where he's for sure fallen behind Jackson Smith-Njigba with this team's pecking order. You have the bye week this week, so absolutely nothing's going to change this week. And you have DK Metcalf presumably coming in next week. So Lockett already wasn't viable, and it does appear that things are pretty much just going to be getting worse here. Keenan Allen obviously is stuck in what appears to be a pretty bad offense, but it wouldn't be the most surprising thing in the world if Caleb Williams did go through and improve in the second half of the year. And you did have double-digit targets for Keenan this past week, so I would drop Lockett for Keenan. Another play that's very easy to make is going through and trying to trade away David Njoku. I would be doing everything I could to trade away David Njoku to a team for a viable quarterback. If you could send David Njoku and Drake May, or David Njoku and Bo Nix, and go get a player like Kyler Murray, it'd be a no-brainer. Looking at the teams that kind of need quarterback help, tight end help. This team has Laporta, but there's no way we can get to Josh Allen here, of course. This team is Hawkinson. It's going to be impossible to trade for Burrow now. This team is rolling Andrews. I think this would be the perfect trade partner with us, where if you could send them one of the rookie quarterbacks and David Njoku, pick up Kyler Murray, have a noticeable difference there at QB. And honestly, wouldn't it be much of a drop-off for us at tight end whatsoever, because we would have McBride, of course, for the long term. And at the same time, you could just decide to go through and pick up Dallas Goedert for free off the waiver wire and not really concern ourselves with tight end depth being a needy thing on this roster. So that's the main move I would make. Outside of that, I think the team is set up for a ton of success here in the long term. I don't think that there is much that you need to be thinking about pivoting over to. I really wish I had more for you here, my friend. I do appreciate you. I hooked you up with the free start sit question, the free trade question, and the free team review. So again, if you have anything that you want to send my way, should be completely free to do so. I really do appreciate you supporting the channel so damn much, my guy. And I really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. But it's a great team, obviously, with Nico coming back in. Now, Parrish coming out with our next question. Here, we need a quarterback. We are going to go Kyler with the rushing upside. Running back, we go Pollard over Hubbard if Brooks plays. If Brooks doesn't, we can revisit this. We go a London at wide receiver. Smith would be our flex if we needed one. And then we're going to go Ferguson at tight end, even with the bad quarterback play. Now, Slasher O coming out with our next question here. Says, in a sticky situation with buys and injuries. Well, I'm excited to look at this for you. Hopefully we can get out of it. This sucks. Yeah, we're freaking have no Josh Jacobs this week. Oh, dear God. I think you maybe end up going through and playing Bucky Irving. The thing is, even if Jonathan Brooks does play, now, Jonathan Brooks is questionable. Jonathan Brooks hasn't been cleared yet, which freaking sucks. So I think you'll lower expectations with Brooks as is for that. Two, Brooks is in a worse offense, obviously, than Bucky. I don't know. The expectations with Brooks, he could go out there and he could play 5 snaps. I have no idea. I don't think he can start Brooks this week. Going over to wide receiver, you have to play Lamb. Way less excited about it than we were. We're going to submit this as if Nico Collins isn't playing, because it's very easy to say if Nico Collins plays, you put him in. But you would go Roma Dunze here, wide receiver 2. And then down in the flex, is there any world where we can play freaking Jalen Tolbert with the injuries? No, I don't think you can. I hate to say it. I think you would go Brooks. But you know what? Brooks plays so early that we may not have confirmation about... We may not have confirmation that we need about Nico Collins yet. So instead, I think maybe you just throw up a prayer with Charbonnet. And if Nico Collins does turn out to be a game time decision, something that you could do is you could plan on Nico and pick up Demarcus Robinson as a last minute or a last resort play if need be. But Sack Jack coming out with a free Underdog team review. Appreciate you. Going to be excited to check this out. Says, I think that I need better receivers. What should we do about compromising my 2 flex plays? Thank you. Love the content. Really do appreciate you, my guy. Right now, we are second in the league analyzer. It looks like there are 4 good teams in this league. There are 2 teams in the middle, and there are 4 garbage teams. We are obviously near the top here. We are a playoff roster. We are currently 12-6. If anybody in the chat's wondering how that is, you play a game against the league median every week. And Sharp's on bye. Yes, I'm sorry, I forgot. So you're going to have to go with Ray Davis there. You're going to have to go Ray Davis and then send up the prayer. But again, I do want to reiterate, if you would be banking on Nico as a game time decision, what I'd probably rather do in that instance is I'd probably rather plan on Nico in the flex and pick up Demarcus Robinson just in case he's not good to go. But looking at Steve's team here, it's a phenomenal squad. It is a league that you can start up to 4 wide receivers weekly. So the wide receiver depth does matter a bit more in a double flex format. Now, of course, with that being said, it's a 10-team league, so there should be better waiver wire options than a 12-teamer. But it does look like your league mates are active. It looks like your league mates know what's up because the options on the waiver wire are a bit limited here. But anyway, going through and looking at quarterback, we have Hurts. So looking at what you have with Jalen Hurts, a quarterback that you can start every single week, regardless of the matchup, right? A zero hesitation. He's through his bye week. You don't need to roster another QB. Puts you in a very good position and just chasing the high upside players down there at the bottom of the bench. Going over to what you have at running back. We are currently sitting with Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, Chase Brown, Nick Chubb. So presumably we have the 2 best running backs in fantasy already through their bye week. And we have somebody else who looks like they can be a running back 1 here as well. So we are in an extremely comfortable position at running back. Going over to wide receiver, we have Adams, Reed. So we have a low end wide receiver 1 / high end wide receiver 2. And we kind of have both those guys. We have 2 high end wide receiver 2s here. We have Ladd McConkey as a viable flex play. Going down in the wide receiver depth, not super strong. The very easy thing to say with this team, and I mean, obviously, I'm not shocking the world by any stretch of the imagination. It's obvious. We are rostering 3 tight ends here, and we're kind of stuck in no man's land in that with these 3 tight ends, at least with Kraft and Goddard at this point, it's not like either has a ton of value where you could look to trade them away, but also they're too good to cut. So it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm stuck rostering 3 tight ends at the moment in a spot where we're not that excited about it. I hate to say this, but especially on a playoff team where we are going to assume that more likely than not, Mike Evans is back after the bye week and Cade Otton does regress just slightly. That while Cade Otton is currently an elite tight end in fantasy, and for that reason, I think that you could be very confident in saying you're going to get some value if you were to go through and try to trade them. If you went ahead and you traded, say, the combo of Cade Otton and Ladd McConkey or Cade Otton and Jerry Jeudy to go get a stud wide receiver, you would still be fine with what you have at tight ends, with backfilling in with Kraft and Dallas Goedert. While definitely they're a downgrade, I don't necessarily know how much of a downgrade it will be by the time you get Mike Evans back in this offense. So if we can find a tight end needy team, like if this team with Kincaid and Schultz would be willing to give us DK Metcalf for the combo of Cade Otton and Ladd McConkey, I think that could be interesting if you were looking to upgrade at the wide receiver spot. That is, this team obviously has a ton of wide receivers. That team's 6-2 as well, so they really could use that production in their lineup right this second. This team down here at the bottom that has CeeDee Lamb, the issue is they don't really have too many wide receivers that we'd be excited about. Now, obviously, they have, this team has Sam Laporta at tight end. They have CeeDee Lamb, but the issue is buying Lamb right now is, I think you're going to have to. I think they'd be willing to sell Lamb at a discount, but I don't know if you would get the discount that we would actually need to go ahead and buy him. So for me, the answer is not to sell a running back, because you go sell Chase Brown and you get a wide receiver. It doesn't really accomplish anything because those guys are filling out your flex spots regardless. The clear play is trying to sell a tight end, going and picking up a wide receiver. And the fact of the matter is, I don't know if you're going to be able to sell Kraft or Goddard for anything. And I think instead, you're more likely going to have to go ahead and you're probably going to have to see if we can get something for Cade Otton. But I really do appreciate you, and I really hope I was able to help you out with this in some way. Thank you again for taking advantage of that free team review through Underdog. And yeah, really do appreciate you being a member of the flock, of course. Now let's move this over to our next question coming out from Damien. So say Mason, 3-6 and got to win now for any playoff chance. What are your thoughts? Hashtag beat Danny Ladd. Danny Ladd hate week. Ooh, let me get a little screenshot of this here to make sure Danny Ladd knows exactly what is up at this point. Let me send this. Let me send this over to Mr. Danny Ladd 21, I believe. I believe that is the name. Okay. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay. So we are back. Going from DJ Moore to Amari Cooper, in my mind, honestly, I do think that is going to be an upgrade here. Jonathan Brooks to David Montgomery, I think that is a massive upgrade. Tua won't move the needle here one way or another. Obviously, Tua is just a streaming quarterback. You can find a bunch of guys like this off the waiver wire. But yeah, I think the best asset in this deal is David Montgomery. And I think you can say Amari, assuming that he is healthy. And you have no Keon Coleman here as well. Amari, I would rather have over DJ Moore. I mean, it's not like DJ Moore has been a consistent option here, and you are getting Rome Odunze expanding his role, and Keenan Allen is seeing double-digit targets. So I think we would go ahead and we'd make this play for Montgomery and Amari. But really appreciate you, of course. Now, Chief Reefer, always happy to see it. This is Neighbors and A.J. Brown versus CMC. This is easily A.J. Brown and Malik Neighbors. So, obviously, CMC has the upside. We've seen it time and time again, where he can be by far and away the best player in fantasy football. And at the same time, it may not even be remotely close. But for you to pay this price to get McCaffrey, that is exactly what McCaffrey would have to be for him to return value. Where you are inherently taking on all the risk by paying the price for the ceiling. So I would rather have Neighbors and A.J. Brown. Now, Zalin coming out with our next question. Here, this is a Dynasty one quarterback league, I believe. We are trading away, and let me just confirm. Is this Dynasty? How many players are we rostering? This may be a keeper league. If this is a Dynasty league, it's an extremely shallow one. We are moving on from Gibbs, A.J. Brown, JSN to get back Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Hunt, and a first. Going from A.J. Brown to Malik Neighbors. If it's redraft, give me A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown not through the bye week already. I think points per game are similar rest of season. If it's a keeper league, if it's Dynasty, then obviously it's very easily Malik Neighbors at that point. Gibbs to Brian Thomas, clear downgrade regardless of what the format is. JSN to Kareem Hunt. I'd rather have JSN, especially if it was a Dynasty or a keeper league. Looking at us getting the extra first round pick. I don't exactly know how this swings it. If this is a full-blown Dynasty league, I want the Neighbors, Brian Thomas, and the first. If this is, even if it's a keeper league, because if it's a keeper league, that means that first-round pick's even more exciting. So, yeah, we're going to go with the side of Neighbors, Brian Thomas, and the first. We'll sacrifice some of the short-term production, and we'll look at the long-term upside here. Now, Cooper coming out with our next question. Here, running back, we have no Jacobs this week, so you are put in a horrible spot. If Brooks plays, you got to go Jonathan Brooks. Obviously, we're not expecting much at all here. If Brooks doesn't play, our pivot would be Jalen Warren. And for the love of God, tell me we have a wide receiver we can put in the flex. And yeah, going over to the flex, you have some wide receivers here. It's really going to come down between Worthy and Rome Odunze for me. I have them in the same tier this week. I probably end up going with worthy. We're obviously have the negative the negative yardage and just negative fantasy points this past week. But still, at the same time, the 2 prior weeks, you had 8 targets, and the Chiefs' offense should be just much better than what you're going to get in Chicago. Now, Frankie says, hey, Mason, untrue to start at wide receiver. Thanks. Thank you, my guy. Here we have some pretty solid options. Obviously, I can say the very easy thing where if Nico Collins were to play, even if he maybe is a little bit banged up, you go ahead and you play Nico Collins. If you're looking at what you have with Brian Thomas without his quarterback play, here's the situation though, because Waddle plays on Monday night. So I would rank this Nico, Thomas, Waddle. So maybe there'd be certain situations in which you say, oh, okay, well, I want to go ahead and I want to take Waddle if it looks like Nico Collins may not play. Like if Nico Collins is a game time decision, maybe you just play Brian Thomas. But the thing is, since Waddle plays on Monday night, you do have a very easy pivot and a backup option. So I'm going to play it on Nico Collins. Obviously, if he's ruled out before the Jacksonville game, you can go ahead and you can take Brian Thomas Jr. But I think the plan for now is let's go ahead and let's take Nico Collins. If he turns out to be a game time decision, then sure, we'll just roll with him. And if he gets ruled out late, then we'll pivot over to Jalen Waddle. Now, D-Money coming out with our next question. This is Josh Jacobs, A.J. Brown versus Barkley and DK Metcalf. I am going to go Barkley and DK here. Very easy way to view this. I'd rather have Barkley over A.J. Brown. Jacobs, Metcalf, give me Jacobs, but it's much closer than the Barkley, A.J. Brown pivot. So yeah, just give me Barkley and DK Metcalf. Now, let me refresh this. We got Jimmy coming out with a massive dono. Really appreciate you, my guy. Let me go ahead and hook you up with a free trade question and a free start sit question here as well, just in case there's something we may not cover. It says, love the content, Mason. Love the rankings. You should do a dynasty with a flock league. The thing is, it would just be a lot. During the offseason, here's what we're going to do. Here's my plan for the offseason. Plan A, I go into hiding, I go to Turkey, I get a hair transplant, and I come back stronger than ever for next football season. Plan B, and what's probably a little more realistic, is I get the itch, and I probably make a dynasty video a week, or a dynasty video, 2 dynasty videos a week, or whatever it is, but I want to chillax this offseason. I'm turning into an old man. The live streaming every single day for years on end is kind of getting to your boy at this point. But what are my chances of winning this year? And should we sell Puka and a second to get A.J. Brown? I would rather have Puka over A.J. Brown straight up. So going through and adding a second rounder on him, even if you were looking to pivot to a contending build, I wouldn't. Right now, we are Gare Bears Cave, third in the league analyzer. I apologize. And the league analyzer here should be taking into account what we have with long-term value, because this is pulling in the dynasty rankings, not just short-term production. This is a 2-quarterback, 12-team format, 2 QB, Superflex, made it a motto, where you only start 9 guys. So here, if you don't have a ton of just typical regular flex spots, but you do have the super flex, quarterback is going to make up an extremely high percentage of our starting lineup output every single week. And I would love to build around 2 elite level options. Now, obviously, we have Lamar, who has been elite this season, and a very big reason on why we are currently sitting at 7-2. And we have Caleb Williams as well. Caleb, more so the long-term play, of course, but still definitely a viable QB2 that we can roll with, that we hope will get better as time goes on. And I guess we were able to pick up Cooper Rush, which obviously actually could move the needle for us here when you're looking at Lamar still having the bye in week 14, of course. Now, going over, this is a team that's 100% looking to contend, right? You look at the running back room. You're currently sitting with Breece, Achane, CMC. So we have 3 running back ones rest of season. Running back, typically a position that you really can only look at if you were wanting to contend. It's very difficult to project running backs out in the long term. But this is one of the very few running back rooms that you probably can with Breece and Achane. I'm very confident that they should make a difference in 2025. We even have Dobbins as the quality depth. So you have so much running back production that even if CMC isn't viable, you still are able to get by at this point. Going over to wide receiver here, this team's, for the love of God, dude, don't panic. You're winning this league this year. Don't go and sell, because going and selling Puka in a second to A.J. Brown, you get a slight upgrade, points per game rest of season, maybe an additional 2 points per game. But in reality, I mean, do you actually need to sacrifice the long-term value on this roster? I don't think so. We have Puka, Wilson, Tyreek. Maybe the wide receiver depth is a little bit shaky, but Puka and Tyreek already through their respective buys. Obviously, Puka and Wilson will be players that have a tremendous amount of value here in the long term as well. The only thing that you could possibly point out with this team is if you are looking at what you have specifically when it comes to the depth at wide receiver is a little bit shaky. So what I would do with this roster, to be honest with you, is I would almost go in the other direction. Rather than leaning even heavier into the contending path, I would almost view a player like J.K. Dobbins as an expendable asset for us at this point, as you get McCaffrey back in. And I would almost want to go ahead and see if we could potentially send Dobbins and get an option specifically at wide receiver that we are a little bit more confident has 2025 value, but also at the same time is going to help us contend this season. Because regardless, for our roster in particular, where we're this strong at running back, that option in terms of how they help our team this year, it really just comes down to their points sliding into a flex spot. It's not like we need that production at running back, whereas I'm pretty confident that you could find a different team in your league that actually would need that production at the running back position. But the last thing I would do here is think that you need to sell long-term value for a short-term upgrade, because you should already be by far and away the favorite with this league. Tyreek and CMC will obviously be much better going into the future than what they have been, and we are already 7-2, so this team's already crushing it. Tight end, we have Kelsey, so we have the elite tight end in the short term here as well, and we potentially have Kraft being a solid option for years to come. So I wish I had some like massive thing with this team. I honestly just think if you could pivot from Dobbins to a wide receiver with a similar expected points per game output rest of season, but maybe with a little bit more security for the 2025 projection and on, that's the move I probably make. But definitely not one that you need to with how strong this roster is. But I really do appreciate you and really hope that I was able to help you out in some way with this. I did hook you up with both the free start sit question as well as the free trade question too. So if there is anything else that you wanted to send my way with this, don't hesitate to. I'd be super happy to look at it for you, my guy. But let's move this over to our next question coming out from Mickey. Here, going down to the flex, we are looking at Walker, DK Metcalf, both on bye. Alexander Madison on bye. Keaton Mitchell have already played. It's really either Leggett or Jamison Williams. I'm not going to fault you for going one way or another. I had Jamison ranked ahead of Leggett in our flex rankings this week, but we did get official word today that you have no Adam Thielen in this game. So now that Thielen is officially ruled out, I think you could make an argument to go ahead and potentially go with Leggett if it's a full PPR format where maybe you don't have the same big play upside, but you could see more target volume than what you'd have with Jameson. Now, Elijah coming out with our next question. This is a trade question where we're upgrading from Purdy to Daniels, we're upgrading from Walker to Jefferson, and we're paying Reed and Higgins to get it done. 100% you make this move. 100%. Just go get the elite studs, almost regardless of what the team is. But, I mean, this is a 10-team league as well, and it looks loaded. So, yeah, go ahead and please, for the love of God, get Daniels and Jefferson here. Now, let me refresh this. Next question coming out from JD Skinner. It says, hey, Mason, wondering what moves I should be looking to make before the playoffs. Last place owns Saquon. Was thinking of maybe trying to make a move for him. First place is obviously super stacked and impossible to trade with. If you could suggest something, I would really appreciate it. Well, I really appreciate you. In my experience, and maybe I'm wrong with this, and maybe it's just from what I've seen, and maybe your league's different. Of course, every league's different. But typically, it's difficult to get deals done with, let me also, real quick. But it's difficult to get deals done with the last place team. And then if you're looking at the last place team, obviously, a lot of the times they are just kind of checking out. They are just kind of done with it. And they'll still be submitting their starting lineup weekly, but they're not exactly looking to go through and try to make any splash plays. But let me hook you up with both a free trade question and a free start sit question here, just in case there's something that we don't cover with this team. We are currently 4th in the league analyzer. The team at 1 is just absurdly stacked. The team at 1 has Achane, Kamara, Walker, Jefferson, Neighbors, Bowers, Puka, Harrison. Like, absurd. If this team at 1 was watching, for the love of God, go trade for Lamar. You can afford it. Now, we are sitting here 4th in the league analyzer. This is a league in which you can start 4 wide receivers weekly. So the wide receiver depth does matter. And we are currently sitting with 3 quarterbacks. So we can't roster 3 QBs. Go ahead and cut Tua. Looking at quarterbacks on the waiver wire, I can make an argument that Kirk Cousins is better than Tua. Does that mean that you need to go through and does that mean that you need to go and drop Tua for Cousins? Not at all. It just means that if you really needed another quarterback, you could always find one off the waiver wire anyway. So I would cut Tua. I'd play Purdy this week, and I'd play the matchups going into the future between Purdy and Darnold. Now, going over to running back, we're in a really comfortable spot. Obviously, we're a playoff team, so if you are looking at what you have with Isaiah Pacheco, you do have the upside for him making the difference in the final stretch of the season. James Conner does have the best fantasy football playoff schedule of any running back in the NFL. Pollard, Tracy are viable depth pieces. So great running back room. Going over to wide receiver, where wide receiver, again, the depth does matter a bit more in this format. We have Tyreek, Nico, Kupp, Hopkins. So we have 4 wide receivers we can start every single week. We have JSN to cover some of the buys, but really the only bye week you have left between these guys will be the Nico Collins one. And also you could really easily, I would probably prefer throwing someone like Tracy into a flex spot here in this league, of course. This is a great team. Going over to tight end, we have Pitts. When we look to cut Tua, I think you do a couple different things. One, I think you just pick up a running back that's an injury away from making a difference, like Tank Bigsby. Just pick up an extra handcuff. You can go and pick up a wide receiver since it's a league where you can start 4 wide receivers weekly, like Keenan Allen. Where what would be very interesting is if you could potentially take DeAndre Hopkins and Brock Purdy and somehow go swing for a QB trade and get one of the quarterbacks that are on the Mount Rushmore. That would be very interesting. Now, of course, it is much easier said than done. But if you could take, say, Hopkins and Purdy and go get Jalen Hurts, go get Josh Allen, go get Lamar, whoever it may be, then at that point, you could drop both the backup quarterbacks. We would have traded away one of the receivers, so we would presumably have 3 open roster spots on our team at that point. And you could backfill with like Keenan Allen for free, with Tank Bigsby for free, with Keon Coleman for free, and just look for some upside rest of season here where we are really strong and we can get by at wide receiver and running back. So for me with this team, at the very minimum, what I would be looking to do is I would be looking to cut the third quarterback with Tua and pick up either Keenan or Tank. I would be looking to trade a wide receiver depth piece, such as Hopkins or JSN, with either a quarterback to go get a true elite QB, or with Kyle Pitts to go get a true elite tight end. And then if you were able to get the true elite QB, then you're actually dropping more quarterbacks than just Tua. But I really do appreciate you and really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. Again, thank you so much, my friend, for being a member of the flock and supporting the channel. I did hook you up with that free start sit question and that free trade question, just in case there was anything else that you wanted to send in my direction. I'd be super happy to look at it. But let's move this over from Husky, something along those lines. Let me actually refresh this. I want to see how this is working real quick. Okay. We are looking to submit the starting lineup this week from a roster review earlier. I think we probably go... actually, no, I'm an idiot. We go to Vontae Adams. I'm sorry. We are going to go Adams. Pollard would be the other guy that you're looking at. Obviously, Pollard's been insane with the workload that he's had this season. But now that you're getting Spears added back in, we can assume that you probably have some receiving usage from Spears here, and it'd be a little bit tougher to just guarantee that Pollard's going to see the 25-plus touches. Now, Rick the Third coming out says, I have more running backs than I can start. I need some advice on potential trade targets. I'm sorry, my guy, you sent in a super chat message. I can't see your team here. If you wanted a team review, you could send that in. If you have a specific trade question, I'm going to hook you up with a free trade question voucher. So if you wanted to follow up on this with a free trade question, I'd be super happy to look at that for you, my guy. Alex Hill's coming up with our next question. Says, big fan, Mason. Should I start Bucky or Marvin Harrison? Definitely Marvin Harrison. Was also considering Addison. Thanks. Thank you. Obviously, Harrison's in a really crappy spot. Really bad matchup. Really up and down wide receiver. Hasn't had the consistent target volume. And Kyler Murray hasn't had the consistent passing volume either. But, I mean, Bucky Irving you're in a 3-man running back by committee in a bad offense. I'm not saying a bad offense, in a bad matchup this week against the Niners. Bucky Irving isn't close to being the same talent that Marvin Harrison is. So I think you have to go Harrison here, to be honest. Now, Carbon Coated coming out with our next question says, this is a must-win for me. Please help, Mason. Thank you, my guy. Excited to check this out. Here, Mahomes, Kyler at quarterback. We are going to go Kyler if it's a 4-point passing touchdown format. Both guys have tough matchups. Obviously, the 3-down running backs are absolute auto starts with Mixon, Achane. Most likely going to get CMC in as well. Just want to confirm. We go Cup, London, and we get CMC in here for the flex. If you're freaking flexing McCaffrey this week, and we have potentially 3 top 5 running backs, very hard not seeing you win this, my guy. I think you're in a great spot. Now, S. Parm coming out with our next question. This is A.J. Brown, Nico Collins, Jake Ferguson versus Kyron, Reed, and Laporta. So Ferguson to Laporta, tomato. Honestly, it really doesn't matter. A.J. Brown versus Kyron Williams. Give me Kyron. Nico versus Reed. Give me Nico. So this is a tough spot. I think you're getting 2 mid-wide receiver ones here. So as long as you have enough running back production, which you do, I would just rather have the wide receivers with AJ and Nico. I'm trying to think if there's any reason you would go with the Kyron side. Kyron's the best player in the deal in my mind, but I just think the gap between Nico and Reed is freaking massive here. Now, Yang coming out with our next question. Where did the dog go? Oh, she's behind me. We're going to go Baker over Tua. Baker, you've had more rushing upside than Tua this season. It's a tough matchup against the Niners, but you do have sportsbooks projecting out us to see more points scored in Tampa. We're going to go with McCaffrey here at RB. And down in the flex, we are just going to follow it up with another running back with Dobbins. Potentially a little concerned that Dobbins sees a small hit with this workload if Gus Edwards plays here. But still, more likely than not, Dobbins is still a must-start option every week. Now, Quentin coming out with our next question says, also starting Nico and London, other quarterback would be Purdy. Should we play Stroud if Nico plays? You go Purdy over Tua. And if Nico plays and you wanted to pivot to Stroud, I'm not going to fault you whatsoever. And then I don't see us needing a... If you need a flex, obviously the guy is Breece Hall by a mile. But if Nico does play, you can definitely go CJ Stroud over Purdy. But the Bucs defense just allows a zillion points to opposing QBs. So I definitely think you want to play Brock Purdy over Tua. Ryan says 12-team full BBR where we have London. I'd rather have Darnell Mooney regardless if you have London or not. Dynasty, it may be a little bit different. I really hope I'm wrong here. I have Ricky Pearsall in the Flock League. I have Ricky Pearsall in a ridiculous amount of underdog drafts. Like, we're going to do very, very well if Pearsall comes through strong in the second half of the season. But the reality of the situation is Mooney is the third option in his offense. Whereas if you're looking at Pearsall, you're behind Debo, Kittle, CMC, and possibly Jennings. So Pearsall is potentially the fifth option in his offense. And his quarterback will run the ball some, where Cousins won't run the ball at all. But Go Mike Pro coming out says, do we run with this team till the end? We are 9-1. I love how we are confident to be 9-1 after the Lamar start. We have Kyron Mixon as auto starts every week. Wide receiver, yeah, you started Chase. Yeah, so we are 9-1. Insane. And I guess we're going to get Nico Collins here in the long term. Down in the flex, you have Trey. I don't see why you would pivot off anything here. I mean, it's a team where it feels like you have a perfect amount of depth and kind of just the perfect combo all around. Like, it's a very well-constructed team, and you're just absolutely crushing at this point. But, yeah, I think you run with it as is. And then, obviously, if Nico doesn't play, you pivot over to Jameson. But it's like, from a football perspective, I'm hoping Nico plays this week. From a fantasy football perspective, though, I am kind of hoping he sits. But I think that should be it here with this live stream. Obviously, we answered all the questions. I'll be live tomorrow going through last-minute injury updates. I'll be live on Sunday morning as well. We have the game in Germany on Sunday. So we're going to be doing like kind of a watch party Sunday morning. I would love if you came hang out with us. But again, I really appreciate y'all. And I really hope we get to see you out with the live streams tomorrow.